welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of many things, but of a delightful recent book. It is a really, really fun read, but it's also very deeply thoughtful and insightful, and I can't wait to talk about it. So, welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Hi, my name's Auston Habershaw, and the book that we're referring to is called If Wishes Were Retail. It's a humorous fantasy, like contemporary fantasy novel about a genie that opens up a shop in a failing American mall selling wishes for money, and it's told from the point of view of his teenage cashier who is tired of his nonsense. And so that's the book. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here and for sharing this book with me. It is so much fun, as I just said. Could you start off by telling us a little bit about your career and your other writing, perhaps?
So my writing career, I have um, published five novels now and something around 35 to 40 short stories in various magazines, all science fiction and fantasy. I've written across the subgenres. I've done a lot of hard science fiction stuff on analog science fiction and fact. I've done, this, which is like humorous fantasy. My first four novels were an epic fantasy series called The Saga of the Redeemed, which is like an epic swashbuckler type thing. There's, duels and swinging from chandeliers and magical hijinks and so yeah, I've done a little bit of everything. The most recent thing I have out, this book came out earlier this summer, and then I also just released a story collection that is gritty, dark sci-fi. It's a series of linked short stories called Faceless Galaxy. So you can see I'm all over the board. so so if Wishes Were Retail is very, very different from Faceless Galaxy. I love both of them, and I think a lot of people like a lot of different things, but part of me wonders sometimes if I should really try and focus on one subgenre or the other, but I am always jumping around from thing to thing.
Is there like a tone or mode that you feel most comfortable in? I know that I hope you don't mind me mentioning that you've written an article about using humor in teaching. So is humor sort of a place where you feel kind of comfy, or what's your natural home?
I think I incorporate humor into almost everything I do. Like, so my day job, I'm a college professor. That textbook chapter you're referring to was in a short work about well, I forget the title of it now, but it was a textbook about using humor in classroom settings and what it is. And I think humor is a really important part of human expression and I use it. I'm not gonna be one of those people who says I'm a funny guy, because that's a silly thing to say, because anyone who says that is probably not that funny. But like I use humor a lot in my classroom. I use a lot in my personal interactions. I was a professional improviser at an improv comedy troupe in Boston for some years after college. So a lot of my work features some kind of humor. Not all of it, of course, but like weirdly enough, so I obviously If Wishes Were Retail is like straight up zany comedy type stuff and almost the style of the 1980s, like sort of screwball comedy. But like the Faceless Galaxy thing I just referred to, which is like very dark and sort of, I call it like alien noir. People will come up to me and tell me like, "Oh, I love the humor in that story," and I'm sometimes surprised. I'm like, "Really?" Like I didn't think there was any, but I guess if there's one common denominator, I like really detailed and sort of flawed characters, and I like humor. So all of my work involves those two elements in some sort of prominent or maybe not prominent way, but it's always present.
So let's talk about Alex a little bit, our protagonist. As somebody who at 42 years old is still paying for an NYU degree, I identified with her struggles in this book. So can you talk a little bit about shaping her character and where she finds herself in life at the moment?
So Alex is one of the two main characters of the novel. So there's Alex and the genie. Alex works for the genie. The genie does not have a name and is very sensitive about telling, well, has a name, but won't tell anyone. Um, but Alex works for him. She's 17 years old. She's living in a vaguely defined northeastern suburb somewhere in the neighborhood of Philadelphia. It's not really clarified. I tried to keep it purposely vague because I didn't want to call out any particular place. And she's very headstrong. She's very opinionated. But she's also and she's she's a 17-year-old, so she's like has a lot of problems with her family. Her family's going through a lot of trouble. They're having a very rocky period. And she desperately wants to escape her hometown, and she wants to run off to NYU specifically, and to have like what would she would consider a real life. And so in developing this character, so I'm a 47-year-old man. So writing a 17-year-old girl is a sort of daunting challenge in the sense that I am not and never was a 17-year-old girl. So what I did to try and draw upon it and to make her voice as authentic as I could get it, I have a teenage daughter. I teach a lot of slightly older young women, like 18, 19, 20-year-olds in college and stuff, which is a little different than like, a high school junior, but not as different as you'd think necessarily. And so I had some experience with girls and young women of that age, and or approximately that age. And so I tried to kind of channel a lot of, what I know from my daughter and from what I know from those students to into what I thought would be an authentic character who was not like a stereotype. Like Alex is not really a stereotype, and she is a little different than a lot of. I like to think she's not stereotypical. She is. I don't know. I don't know how to exactly put it. She's a little goth, I suppose. But yeah, it was I had to really try and transpose myself into that character, and it took some doing. There were some rocky spots along the way, which a lot of my beta readers helped me with, and including my daughter. I had my daughter read it, and she gave me a couple points about things. There was one thing though, there's one thing I definitely screwed up. I'm sure there's more than one thing, but one thing I definitely screwed up about Alex's life experience is that at one point I describe her as having paper college applications in her room, which is not a thing any student alive today has. That doesn't exist. And I just forgot, and no one caught it. Like no one caught it. Granted, most of my readers were older, were like, my age or like in their 20s or 30s. So like most of them had not gone through college recently, but I missed that. And and my daughter, who has not started to apply to colleges yet, also missed that until later. One She gave it to one of her friends, like after it was too late to do anything about it. And her friend was like, no one does that anymore. I was like, oh, oh well. So I'm sure I messed up in various ways that I'm not aware of, but I tried very hard to try and make her authentic, which was, as I said, kind of a challenge, a departure, a little bit worrisome for me because she really needed to be who she was, and I couldn't have her be a boy. I couldn't do any of that stuff because she just kind of popped out of the page. She wasn't originally the main character. I had a different I had a I had an analog of myself as a 17-year-old there. I was just a boring suburban kid, white dude there. And And I had her as a another worker at the kiosk. There were two employees, and she was just so much more interesting. And I'm like, okay, ditch this guy. This guy's not interesting. So I deleted him entirely. But yeah, that's kind of where Alex came from.
Yeah, her voice does come across as really authentic and it contrasts hilariously with the voice of the genie. So I'd love to talk about him. He doesn't like to be called the genie, first of all, so I've already messed up. Could you talk a little bit about shaping his character and their dynamic? Because it feels like, obviously there's lots of humor that comes from the fantasy elements, but also like from what feels like, in some ways, like an analog for intergenerational conflict in the workplace.
Yeah, so yeah, I that is definitely present. The Jin is not based on any actual person I have met. I should make sure I preface that. I feel like that's obvious, but I don't know. You never know. I worked a lot of really odd jobs in my 20s. I came out of college with the rather naive assumption that I was going to become a writer and that I just needed to get a job that paid the bills. And at night I'd write, and before you knew it, I would be published and everything would be fine. And that is absolutely not how it works. And and so I did a lot of really odd jobs in a lot of different places, many different places, a lot of different bosses. And the idea of the genie was, um, first of all, it's just inherently funny. Like it's funny to have to have this all-powerful being reduced to working at a kiosk in a failing mall, like like across from the better body outlet, that's selling like oils and like near the person who's selling aerial photographs of your neighborhood, like the sort of random stuff you see in malls that aren't doing so well. And I just thought that was funny, and also it created really interesting dynamic about like what would people wish for. But in terms of the character, he is not a Robin Williams-esque genie, right? He's not goofy or funny at all. He's very much rooted in the well, I haven't read them in the original Arabic or anything, but the old translations of the Thousand and One Arabian Nights, in which the genies are fearsome creatures in those stories. They are creatures of great power. They're very serious. They have certain limitations about what they will or will not do. They have standards. And so the genie is this character who is very serious and believes very strongly in keeping his word and being what he considers to be a upright citizen. And like that's his whole goal. Like he finds himself freed from bondage, which I never really explain, and I don't intend to, about how he's no longer trapped in a ring. He was really trapped in a ring, and it's been thousands of years, and he doesn't have any. He's estranged from his own kind, and he wants to become a member of society. And finds himself in the United States. And of course, the whole mythology around us is that, you start your own business and you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you become a respected member of society by contributing to the economy. And so that's what he plans on doing. And to him, it seems a very honorable thing to do. He's going to start a shop. It's an honorable, and the only thing he knows how to do is grant wishes. So, like, let's do that. And um and he is very serious and also very clueless about the society around him, and he doesn't understand, because our society, like, you really start to think about it, a lot of it doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's very contradictory and foolish. And so I created this character who's very serious and sure of himself, and put him in a situation where he really doesn't know what's going on, and yet because he's all powerful, he necessarily assumes that he knows best. Like, I have lived for 3,000 over 3,000 years. A 17-year-old girl can't tell me what to do. Like, can't tell me what is correct. This doesn't make any sense. And yet as the story goes on, he finds himself relying on her more and more because, like, her advice is actually good advice. Like, Alex is pretty smart. She knows, what she's doing, sort of. I mean, she's a teenager, like, so she doesn't know everything, but like she understands the basics of how a business ought to run, in terms of, like, you need a sign, Like he doesn't even have a name for his business to start off. He's just sitting there in the mall and everyone's like, what the hell's with that guy? And she's like, no one understands what this is. You need a sign, you need a business name. And he's like, that seems degrading. I don't, most of these business names are puns. I don't really want to do that. And she's like, trust me, and so in terms of the generational divide thing, I think there is something there in that um, we older folks often take for granted that our experiences when we were young are still valid today. And the genie is a very, very extreme example of that. I mean, he still is trafficking in pieces of silver, and he refuses point blank to use dollars because he thinks it's insane. Like thinks this. You mean it's just a piece of paper, and the government just says it's worth stuff? That's insane. That's a terrible idea. Trust me, I've seen many governments fail. You're going to be very pleased when you have silver when all this is over. And Alex is like, man, I just want to buy a coffee, and I can't do it with a with a coin. So yeah, I think there is something there, and that part of what necessarily happens over the course of the book is they learn to understand each other's perspectives a little bit better. And whereas at the beginning it's very contentious, they're always getting in arguments and fights, and towards the end they're still arguing, right? But like they start to respect and appreciate what each other brings to the table, and I think that's something we can definitely, younger people and older people, could you know learn from. That we both need to recognize our limitations.
Absolutely. It's sort of like people who speak the same language but different dialects, sort of having to learn how to communicate despite the slight gaps, and in experience and in language. I'm really curious about how you do world building, because there are other creatures besides Jinn in this world. And I'm really curious about how you do world building through humor. Like a lot of humor comes from like the differing points of views of characters that we've just been talking about a little bit. But how else is humor at play in sort of like building the world around these characters?
So the world building I did in this book was different than the kind of world building I have done in other works. So like in my epic fantasy series, I had like a world Bible. I wrote up all this stuff. I drew maps. I devised, all kinds of stuff because it was a secondary world fantasy, right? So you have to do the whole thing. And likewise in the science fiction setting that Faceless Galaxies set in, I created the biologies of all the different aliens and like figured out how do they travel faster than light and how do they do and this was very, very different. Um, in that um, the the impetus for the fanciful creature. So I've written several stories set in this same world prior to this, published short stories. So like there was one where a dragon had to downsize into a suburban cul-de-sac, and filled the in-ground pool with gold, like like and 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 part of that is that the juxtaposition of the fanciful and the real is funny if we let it be. It a lot of contemporary fantasy, their objective is to create what I guess the technical term would be an intrusive fantasy, in which like you have a normal world and then this fanciful thing shows up and destroys or alters our understanding of the world, which causes all sorts of trouble and cataclysm, right? Like, um, I don't know if you saw To Kill a Death of a Unicorn, which is a recent A24 movie, in which like a unicorn shows up and they accidentally hit it with the car and like and it's sort of funny, but like it's the unicorn is intrusive and has necessarily changes the lives of everybody around it because of its fancifulness. I have chosen a very different approach with this in that I have not made the fantastic that fantastic to the people around. So like the genie's in the mall, and yeah, it's shocking because people have not seen a genie in the mall before. But rather than it creating some sort of like massive government response where like some sort of like special team gets dispatched to deal with the problem or anything, or Alex is has to save the world, or like, there's some sort of villainous genie cabal behind the genie. Like, none of that happens. The genie just wants a job. Like, he's just there. He wants to become part of society. There's also gnomes in the book, and that's just, the gnomes just have a job. Like, they do a job and they get to stay in the mall, as like they clean the mall and they live there. So hooray. Like, and the reason I did it that way, and the reason that all these stories that I've set there and any stories I set there in the future will basically be that way, is that I feel it is a reflection, is a metaphorical reflection of our current world, where it seems like every day something completely bananas happens, something totally that we have never experienced in our lives, that seems really frightening or bad or very strange. And we all kind of go, well, I guess I got to go to work. Like, nothing happens. And so a lot of the humor and a lot of the absurdity and a lot of the world building is built around that basic principle, which is that we actually would adapt to the fantastic, I think, a lot faster than like Hollywood would have us believe. Like, because honestly, a couple years ago, I think it was the Air Force came out and was like, "Hey, yeah, UFOs definitely exist. They definitely exist," and it barely made the news. We all went, "Oh, wow, okay." Like, and so like the thing I keep saying is, like, if the CDC were come up and say like vampirism is real, all of us would go, "Oh man, that stinks." Wow, oh, we really like, I guess I better pack garlic spray in my purse, and like, that would be it, right? And so the humor kind of comes from, it's very metaphorical. I'm poking fun at us, at how like the world's gone insane, and we're still like, well, we still got to wash the dishes, and what are we gonna do? I don't know. There's a genie at the mall. What do you want from me? Call the cops? Like, what are the cops gonna do? He's not breaking any laws. So, that's where it comes from, and that's how it was built.
That's a great point, and that's a really fun observation. Yeah, because I think if anything, humans we're really good at gaslighting ourselves into accepting almost anything as normal. So
Yeah, because we want it to be normal, right? We want normal, and we don't want not normal. So, like, we will do anything we can to get the abnormal to fit into our version of normalcy, um, which is shocking. I didn't think that was the case, but the last 10 years have really proven to me, no, that's exactly how we're going to do it.
yeah, yeah. Wow. And something else I think that you use to really good satirical effect is you use the wishes that people make to sort of like lovingly or not so lovingly poke at people's foibles, vulnerabilities, sort of like the weaknesses of human nature. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I like that you say lovingly and not so lovingly,
Yeah.
because there's some people who have really objectively terrible wishes that frequently the genie doesn't grant. Um, I so with the wishes, one of the like fun things I did as I was kind of preparing to write the book is I thought this idea of selling wishes for money, but like selling them for money does sort of like counteract the notion of the wish, right? The notion of the wish is you get anything you want, right? And it doesn't cost you anything. And I'm like, well, I mean, he's selling them, so how much would they cost? And so I started asking people, what would you wish if it cost money? What would you wish for, and how much would you be willing to pay? Because it's all negotiable, right? The genie doesn't have like price tags on stuff. Well, he does, but they're totally useless. So like they're they're like, it would be 500 pieces of silver for a soft rain over one's fields or whatever, and no one wants that. Or well, there probably are people who want that, but they're not gonna. It's all out of whack. It doesn't quite work in the modern world in the same way. So um I started asking people this question, and they had a lot of trouble answering it, because the money thing just screws it all up, right? Because people would say like world peace. And then I'd be like, well, okay, how much do you think world peace should cost? And he's like, I don't know, like $5, because like it doesn't cost the genie anything. And I'm like, well, that like, that's obviously a genie's not going to do that. Like, he wants fair compensation for his work. It doesn't matter if you think it's easy for him. The guy spent 3,000 years enslaved. I think he's entitled to some compensation, and he's not just going to do that. And also, how would he do that? Like, what does that even mean? And so a lot of the book is poking fun and messing with this idea of what we want, also what we want versus like what we actually need as not being really in line. There's sort of obvious things, and the obvious things do come up in the book, cure for this disease or, that kind of thing. But there's also people who wish for things that don't directly address their central problem, which I think in our consumerist culture, like the world we live in, is very much devoted to getting us to think the things they want us to buy are the things that are going to solve our problems. And very frequently that is not the case, right? Like, um, you know, cell phones are useful tools in so many different ways, but they also cost us more than just the money they cost, like our attention, our peace of mind, our ability to disconnect from work. Um, uh, you know, I think there's a lot of, and you can pick almost anything. I mean, gosh, go to the fashion industry or the food industry. I mean, the way in which food is marketed to us as something that will make us feel good, when in fact that food is probably also bad for us. Like, we probably shouldn't eat so much of it. You know, um, that I also deal with that issues, right? Where like people are wishing for sort of short-term comfort when they're refusing to confront the systematic and often structural problems that would actually solve their problems, that they would actually be happier if they wished for, but they would never wish for it for a bunch of reasons. They don't realize it. They don't think it would work. They don't think the genie could do it. They don't think they could afford it if they asked. And so, yeah, so that's the wishes. The wishes are a big part of the book, obviously, and I mess around with them in all kinds of different ways.
Yeah, it's such a fun ride, but it does have a lot of really pointed things to say about the world that we live in and such a good read. What are you working on now? Is there anything on your horizon at the moment?
So, yeah, so I had the story collection that just came out, so there's that, which is very, very different from that sci-fi. It's Faceless Galaxies, um, linked short stories. I have a book on submission right now, which has not been accepted for publication, which is set in the same world, and that is less of a straight up comedy, though it is humorous. It is about a crime solving dragon and her sidekick. The dragon is an art collector, doesn't collect gold, hoards art. And she and her sidekick are going to solve a long standing 30-year-old um, museum heist. Which is roughly based off the Isabella Stewart Gardner heist from Boston. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's the biggest unsolved art heist in history. And I kind of, stripped the serial numbers off that and kind of messed around with it a little bit. And I'm going to have them solve this like long-standing cold case. And it's a whodunit. It's a fun, mystery novel with a lot of humorous elements to it. And so that's the thing. Hopefully, I'm able to sell that. My agent's able to sell that, and that appears. And then beyond that, I've had a very busy summer, and I haven't managed to kind of nail down exactly what the next book would be. But I am going to try and stay in this world and stick with the sort of what I've kind of started to refer to in my head as the reawakened world, even though that's a deliberate misnomer in that the fanciful beings have always been here. People just haven't noticed until recently. I'm trying to do something with this affluent suburb that's held up entirely by fairy glamour. I haven't quite managed that yet. And so, I got a lot of different things kicking around. I always have a bunch of ideas. I have a lot of ideas that aren't in this world as well, and we'll see when and how those show up. But I have a short story coming out in September in Analog Science Fiction and Fact, which again is hard science fiction and has nothing to do with any of this. It's about engrams, recordings of personality constructs and the depression resulting from miscarriage. It's very, it's like really not at all this at all. So everything I'm doing is kind of all over the map. But in this world, I plan on releasing more books in this world if I can manage it. So.
Nice. Well, that's extremely exciting for me to hear because I would read so many more books in this world. So I hope our listeners will help out by checking out If Wishes Were Retail immediately.
Yes,
It'll be
please.
so much fun.
I'm I'm glad you think so, and I am very pleased with the reaction, the early reaction the book has been getting, and thank you so much for helping me here.
Oh, no problem. It's been an absolute delight to talk to you. Please, listeners, head out to your favorite bookstore, library, website to pick it up. Do you have a place that you like to send people for books?
No, not specifically. Anywhere you get it is fine. It's If Wishes Were Retail by Auston Habershaw. You can find it kind of anywhere. I would like to shout out bookshop.org, which I don't think as many people know about, which is a an online book marketplace like Amazon, but they source their books from independent bookstores across the country, as opposed to, from Amazon's giant warehouses. And Amazon, of course, is very important to every writer's business. So, but if you like supporting independent bookstores, bookshop.org is a good place to go. You can also find me and all the things I'm up to online at aahabershaw.com, which I update that semi-frequently. You can follow that website and get updates there about the various appearances I'm going to be making, and short fiction and long fiction news and all that stuff. So.
All right. So you have your assignment at home, so get to it. Thank you so much for joining us. It is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.